Some people file paperwork about the water. My son would have pulled people out of it. My mother-in-law said that from a podium, into a microphone, at the 32nd annual dinner of the scholarship that carries her dead son's name, in a fire hall with 160 folding chairs, every one of them full. She said it looking at the back of the room, where I was sitting, and half the town turned in their seats to follow her eyes, because in a town this size everybody knows exactly who files paperwork down at the Coast Guard station. Above her, on the projection screen, her boy Cole smiled out of 1994 forever, 19 years old, holding a striped bass half as long as he was. I did what I have done at 31 of these dinners before this one. I looked at that boy's photograph, not at her, and I put my hands flat on my knees under the table, and I counted my breathing the way you count it when the basket is swinging, and the water wants what you are holding. 4 in, 4 out. On the table in front of me, next to my water glass, sat my key ring with the old brass whistle on it, the one this family has been calling my lifeguard whistle for 17 years. The laughter in the hall was the polite kind, the kind that agrees without checking. It was still moving through the room when the girl at the head table stood up. This year's scholarship winner, 24 years old, invited to say a few words of thanks after dinner. She was not scheduled to stand yet. She was looking at me, from all the way across that fire hall, and she was holding something small and folded in both hands, and her face had gone the color of a person who has just heard a sound they have spent 6 years trying to find again. To understand what that girl was holding, and what my mother-in-law said next, the thing nobody in that hall saw coming, including me, you have to go back to the water, and to a promise I made my husband 17 years ago. My name is Maren Kowalski. I am 46 years old, and for 24 years I have served in the United States Coast Guard, and if you asked anyone at that dinner what I do, they would have told you what my mother-in-law has been telling this town for 17 years. Maren works down at the air station. Administrative. Something with the flight schedules. It is not a lie, exactly. There is paperwork. The way there is paperwork in every job on Earth. It is just not the job. Here is the job. I am a rescue swimmer. The rating is called Aviation Survival Technician, and what it means in plain language is that when a boat goes down, or a car goes off a bridge, or a fisherman's family calls at 2 in the morning, a helicopter flies out over water that no sane person would enter, and I am the one on the cable. They lower me into it. Into night water, storm water, water with fuel burning on top of it, and my entire profession is 1 sentence long. The swimmer goes down so the survivor goes up first. I have done that, in the dark, more times than I am going to number for you, because the numbers belong to the people I brought up and to the ones I could not, and I keep both lists in the same place, and neither one is for dinner conversation. The whistle on my key ring is not a lifeguard whistle. It is a brass signal whistle, standard survival gear, and it goes into the water with me on every case. Because a light can fail and a radio can drown, but a whistle works as long as you have 1 breath left to spend on it. The paint has gone off it from salt. My family has made the same joke about it at 17 years of holiday dinners. Don't forget your whistle. Maren, the pool opens at 9. I have laughed at that joke 17 times. I want you to remember the whistle. It is small, and it is the loudest thing in this story. Now I have to tell you about Cole, because none of what happened to me makes sense without him, and because he deserves better than to be a plot point in anybody's evening, including mine. Cole Kowalski was my husband's older brother. In October of 1994, when Cole was 19 and my husband Grady was 15, Cole crewed on a neighbor's fishing boat that went over in a squall 11 miles out. The Mayday came in broken. The search ran 3 days, cutters and aircraft and half the working boats in this harbor. And at the end of 3 days the water gave back 1 life ring and Cole's jacket, and it kept everything else. There was a funeral with no casket. I have heard every detail of those 3 days many times, never once from my husband, always from his mother, because Eileen tells it the way some people tend a garden, on her knees, every season, keeping the edges sharp. And I want to say this plainly, before I tell you anything hard about her. What Eileen built out of those 3 days is real. She took the worst thing that can happen to a mother, and she turned it into the Cole Kowalski Memorial Scholarship. 31 years of dinners in that fire hall. Over $1,100,000 raised. Dozens of local kids put through maritime safety courses and lifeguard certifications and boating classes. Kids in this town float today because that woman refused to let her boy sink quietly. The scholarship is the best thing in this story. Hold on to that, because the same hands built everything else too. I met Grady in 2008, at a dockside fundraiser, which I attended in civilian clothes because I had just transferred to the air station and knew nobody. He was a high school science teacher with sawdust on his sleeves from building sets for the school play, and he made me laugh twice in the first 10 minutes. And he did not flinch when I told him what I did for a living. He went quiet instead. Then he said, "My brother drowned out there." And I said, "I know, everyone at this party has told me." And he laughed at that. One surprised bark of a laugh, like something rusted had turned over, and that was more or less that. The promise came a year later, 3 weeks before the wedding, in his truck outside his mother's house. He turned the engine off and sat there with his hands on the wheel, and he asked me for the only thing he has ever asked me for. Don't tell her what you do. Not the details. Not the swimmer part. He was not ashamed of me. I need you to understand the order of things, because I misunderstood it myself for years. He was protecting her. Every rescue on the evening news put his mother in bed for 2 days. Every Coast Guard helicopter that crossed the harbor sky turned her toward the window. He said, "She looks at that water and she sees the 3 days. If she knows what you are, every time you walk out our door she'll be back in October of '94. Let her think it's paperwork. It's kinder." And I sat in that truck, 29 years old, in love, trained my entire adult life to give people what they need to stay alive, and I decided that this was just one more version of the job. I said yes. I want the record to show that nobody took my name from me. I handed it over, in a parked truck, out of kindness, and kindness signed the paperwork. For a few years the mask cost almost nothing. Eileen was careful with me, formal, the way you are careful with a stranger standing near something precious. Then the little sandings began, so fine you could argue each one away. At Thanksgiving, introducing me to a cousin. This is Grady's wife. She does the filing down at the station. The word filing doing the work of a whole opinion. The town whispered it too, acting as the perfect executors of her quiet disdain, passing the word around until the myth became reality. At Christmas, when my duty phone went off and I stood up from the table, the small sigh, the glance around at the other guests. Well, apparently the paperwork is urgent. Year over year, the version of me that lived in that family's mouth got smaller, and I stood inside the shrinking costume and held still, because holding still is a thing I am professionally excellent at, and because every time I wanted to speak, I saw Grady's hands on that steering wheel. One year, things changed, and I misread the change for a decade, and the misreading is the engine of this entire story. In 2016, Eileen had her hip replaced and stayed in our guest room for 6 weeks. Somewhere in those 6 weeks, something in her went over to a new setting. The sanding stopped being fine. This is the year the jokes about the whistle got teeth. This is the year she started saying things like, "It must be restful," working so far from the actual water, and watching my face while she said them, the way you watch a scale while you press on it. I told myself grief ages sideways. I told myself hips hurt and houses are close quarters. I filed her under mourning, and I kept holding still. You already know, because I have told you where this story is going, that I had filed her under the wrong thing entirely. I just did not know what the right thing was, and I would not find out for 9 more years. In a fire hall, in front of the whole town, with a girl standing at the head table holding something folded in both hands. There is one more thing you need before we go to that dinner, and it is the story the town tells without knowing it is telling it about anyone. Every October, for about 15 years now, somebody has been leaving flowers at the end of the stone jetty, out past the harbor light. On the anniversary of the day the search for coal was called off. Nobody has ever seen who. Eileen found out about it years ago, and it became her favorite proof of her son's shine. One of his old friends, she tells people. Someone he touched. Faithful all these years. She has wondered aloud at dinners which of his classmates it might be. She has narrowed it down. She has never once narrowed it down to the right person. And every October I have sat at her table and listened to her wonder. And I have said nothing. And I want you to keep that bouquet in your mind the whole way through what happens next. Because it is the last thing that goes off. And it is not a weapon. And it does the most damage of all. The 33rd annual dinner fell on the second Saturday of October, the way it always does. In the fire hall on Cannery Row, the way it always does. I have the rhythm of that evening memorized the way you memorize a pre-flight check. Doors at 5. Chowder at 6. The slideshow of coal at 7. The same 40 photographs in the same order, ending on the striped base. And before any guest arrives, always there is Eileen at the memorial table by the entrance, taking a folded white handkerchief from her purse and wiping the glass over her son's photograph, top to bottom, left to right, though there is never any dust, because she is the one who cleaned it the year before and the 30 years before that. I have watched her do it 31 times. It is the 1 minute of the whole night that has no performance in it, and I have never once interrupted it. This year I helped carry chafing dishes in from the church van, because I always do. And when I went to find my seat, I found the seating chart had put me at the last table by the coat rack, between a supplier who donates the napkins and an empty chair. Grady was up front, at the family table, below the screen. He caught my eye across the hall and gave me the small, helpless shrug he has been giving me for 17 years. The one that means. One night a year, and I gave him back the nod that means. I know, and I hung my jacket on the rack behind me, which at least meant I could reach my own coat without asking anyone's permission. You take the wins available. I want to leave the fire hall for a minute now, because you cannot understand what happened at the podium unless you come out over the water with me first. 6 years back, to the last week of October, 2020, and a storm that had a name. Odalus came up the coast slow and wide, and on the second night of it, a 26-foot sailboat with a family of 3 aboard lost its engine and then its mast somewhere off the shoals, 9 miles out. The call went out at 11:40 at night. We launched into 40-knot gusts and rain that came sideways like gravel. I remember the flight out mostly as sound, the airframe working, the pilot's voice reading the numbers flat and even, and below us, when the searchlight finally found the boat, sees the size of houses moving in no order at all. The father and mother came up first, one at a time, in the basket. That took most of an hour and everything the crew had. And then there was the girl, 18 years old, and by the time the basket went down for the third lift, the boat had broken enough that she was in the water, in a life jacket, in the dark, being taken away from the wreck by a current with somewhere else to be. The searchlight lost her twice. What you do, when the light cannot hold and the radio is a wall of wind, is you go where physics says she drifted, and you put your own head in the water, and you use the whistle. 3 short. Wait. 3 short. A brass whistle in black water carries farther than a voice ever will, and it tells a person one thing a light cannot tell them. It says, somebody is in here with you. I found her by her answering shout on the second pattern. She had swallowed water and lost a shoe, and she was still fighting, which is the thing that saves people, and I locked her into the harness against me. And while we waited under the down blast for the cable, I did the talking, close to her ear, the same words I always use. I've got you. We go up together. Look at me, not the water. She looked at me. 18 years old, hypothermic, 1 shoe, and she did exactly what I asked, which is more than most grown men manage, and the hoist took us up through the rain, and at the top the flight mechanic pulled us in, and she would not let go of my sleeve until the medic peeled her fingers off it one by one. I never learned what became of her, and she never learned who I was. That is not sad. That is the system working. Survivors get a helicopter, a blanket, a hospital, and a bill they will fight for a year. They do not get names. The crew list is a number on a report. There was a photograph in the county paper that week, taken by someone on the beach with a long lens, a gray smear of helicopter and a smaller smear on the cable below it. Uncredited, unnamed weather in every pixel. Grady cut it out and kept it in his desk and never told his mother why. I flew 4 more years after that storm, and I am telling you about this one case. Out of all of them. For a reason you have already guessed. And I promise you I had not guessed it. That night at the fire hall. When the chowder went around and the slideshow music started. Back to the dinner. The program this year had a new line in it, and Eileen announced it from the podium with both hands on the microphone. For the first time, the scholarship's newest recipient would say a few words after the presentations. A remarkable young woman, Eileen said, a survivor herself, now studying maritime safety, exactly the future Cole would have wanted. And a young woman at the head table stood halfway and waved to the room. Brown hair, sunburned nose, a dress she was not comfortable in, and sat back down fast, and knocked her fork off the table doing it, and laughed at herself, and the room laughed with her kindly. I clapped from the coat rack table. I thought, good, she has fight in her. You can see it from here. I did not look at her longer than anyone else did. I want that on the record, too. Whatever recognition is, it did not happen for me. I had held her in black water with a mask on my face and my hood up and a storm between us. And 6 years later she was a stranger in an uncomfortable dress, 40 feet away, with her purse in her lap. She kept her purse in her lap all night, both hands on it, the way you hold a thing with something important inside. The presentations ran long. The auctioneer did his auction. And somewhere in the second hour, with the wine going around, the evening arrived at the place it had been traveling toward for 17 years. A man at the table next to mine, a summer person with a boat too big for his slip, leaned over friendly and asked what I did. And before I could answer, Eileen's voice arrived from behind my shoulder, carrying pitched for the tables around us. She had come down the hall with the coffee pot, playing hostess, and she answered for me, the way she has answered for me at 100 gatherings. Marin handles the paperwork down at the air station, she said. Flight schedules. Very organized. The man nodded, satisfied, filed me away. And Eileen stood there a beat longer than the sentence needed, with the coffee pot, looking at me. And this is the detail I did not understand until later, so I will just set it down for you the way I received it. She was not smiling the way you smile at a joke. She was watching me the way you watch a scale while you press on it. Then she moved on with the coffee. There was 1 clean minute in that whole evening, and I spent it by the side door with the fire hall's oldest volunteer, a man named Walt who has run the chowder pot for all 32 dinners and whose hands shake now too much to ladle, so he supervises. We stood in the doorway where the cold air comes in, and he told me his granddaughter had finally gotten her boat license and that he had cried at the DMV. Actually cried, at the laminating machine, and we laughed. And he said, "Don't tell my wife." And I said, "Walt, everyone at this party has told your wife." For 1 minute the evening was just a town in a room, feeding itself, remembering a boy. Then the microphone popped twice, and Eileen's voice asked everyone to find their seats for the closing remarks. And Walt squeezed my arm and went back to his pot, and I went back to the coat rack. The closing remarks are the same every year, and every year they are earned, and I want to be fair about that even now. She thanks the town. She names the year's donors. She looks up at the screen, at the boy with the striped base, and lets the room be quiet with her, and no one breathes wrong during that silence. Because whatever else she is a mother standing under a photograph, and the whole hall carries it with her, and so do I. Every year. That is where it ends. God bless. Drive safe. See you next October. This year she did not end there. This year she looked down from the photograph, out into the hall, and found the coat rack table, and I watched it happen, the way you watch weather arrive across water, visible whole seconds before it reaches you. The scholarship exists, she said, because no one reached my son in time. The room murmured its yes. And then she said it. The sentence you have already heard, the one this whole story hangs from, with the microphone doing the work of carrying it to every folding chair. Some people file paperwork about the water. My son would have pulled people out of it. And the polite laughter went around, the kind that agrees without checking, and my hands went flat on my knees. And I looked at the boy in the photograph and not at his mother, and I counted, 4 in, 4 out, and I had gotten as far as the second floor when, at the head table, scraping her chair back with both hands still clamped on her purse, this year's scholarship winner stood up out of turn. She did not walk to the podium. She walked past it, down the center of the hall, right in front of me. She dropped her heavy leather purse. It hit the wooden floor with a loud, hollow thud that cleanly cut the room's murmurs in half. In that sharp silence, she unfolded the thing she was holding, and it was newsprint, gone soft at the creases the way paper gets when it has been opened and closed for 6 years. A gray photograph. A helicopter in weather. A smear on a cable. She laid it on the tablecloth between us, turned so it faced me, and her voice came out small and did not need to be big, because the fire hall had gone so quiet you could hear the coffee urn ticking. "Say it," she said. "What you said in the water. Please." And the coffee urn ticked, and somewhere behind me a fork was set down onto a plate with enormous care, and I looked at this girl. Sunburned nose, uncomfortable dress, both feet planted like a person standing on a deck, and 6 years folded up the way newsprint folds. "I've got you," I said. "We go up together. Look at me, not the water." The sound she made was not crying, and it was not a word. It was the sound of a held thing letting go. She put her hand over her mouth, and then she turned to the hall. Because she had come up that aisle with a purpose, and she was going to finish it. And she pointed at the clipping on my table, and her voice found its size. 6 years ago my family's boat broke apart in a storm at night, she said. A swimmer came down on a cable into water they had no business being in, and the light lost me twice, and what found me in the dark was a whistle. 3 short blasts. She had to stop there. 1 second, 2. "I have been looking for the sound of that whistle for 6 years, she said, "and tonight it is sitting on a key ring at the worst table in this room." The whole fire hall turned. Not to me first. That is the detail I will carry out of this life. They turned first to the screen, to Cole, 19 forever, holding his fish, and then down to the coat rack table, to me, and then back, caught between the boy the water kept and the woman it kept sending down, and no one could hold both of us in their eyes at once, and no one dared choose, and the room simply stopped, 160 people balanced on a hinge. Every face was doing the same arithmetic, and every face finished it at the same place, which was Eileen, alone at the podium, under her son. And here is where I have to slow this story down to the speed it actually happened at, because what the room was waiting for, what you are waiting for, what 17 years of shrinking had earned, was for my mother-in-law to go white, to grab the podium, to learn in one public instant who had been sitting at her coat rack table. I watched her, and I waited for it too. It did not come. Eileen looked at the girl, and at the clipping, and at me, the whole length of the hall, and what moved through her face was not shock. I know shock. I have delivered news to families on docks at 4 in the morning. Shock is a fall. What crossed my mother-in-law's face was a thing arriving that she had been carrying alone for a long time, finally setting itself down. She was holding the engraved plaque for this year's donors, and she set it on the podium shelf, deliberately, with both hands, the way you set down something before you say a true thing. "I know what she is," Eileen said, into the microphone, to the whole town. "I've known for 9 years." Nobody moved. Grady stood up at the family table and sat back down without deciding to do either. Eileen came out from behind the podium then. No microphone. But the hall was a held breath and her voice carried on its own. 2016, she said. My hip. 6 weeks in their guest room. I was looking for spare blankets in the hall closet and I found a wooden case. And inside it was a medal with a ribbon. And a citation with her name on it. And words on that citation I have read every day since in my mind. Heroism. Aerial flight. Lives saved. She looked at me, 40 feet of fire hall between us, and her chin was level and her hands were empty and shaking. My son screamed for 3 days in that water, she said, and it was not a fact. It was the wound itself, out loud in public, for the first time in 31 years. And 9 years ago I found out I had been seating a person at my table who does the thing nobody did for him. Who goes into that water and comes back holding people. And I could not. Her voice went down to gravel. I could not look at what you are without seeing what he needed. So I made you small. On purpose. Every dinner. For 9 years. It was easier to have a paperwork girl at my table than an answered prayer that came 26 years late. You could hear the coffee urn. You could hear the fire hall's flag rope ticking against the pole outside. 160 people sat in the wreckage of the sentence, because it was not an apology and it was not an attack. It was a confession, and confessions are the one thing a room cannot laugh at or clap for. Piper stood beside my table with her hand still over her mouth. Grady had his face in both hands at the family table, and I understood, watching him, that he was doing his own arithmetic. 9 years of his mother knowing against 17 years of him asking me to hide. 2 kindnesses, both of them mine to wear. And I stood up. Not fast. I stood the way you stand in a moving cabin, sure of your feet before you trust them, and I did not go to the podium either, because this family has had enough of podiums. And the whole hall waited to hear what the swimmer says to the woman who just admitted she spent 9 years holding her underwater. I had one sentence in me, and it was not about me, and it was not about her. Eileen, I said, and my voice did what the whistle does. It carried because it was simple. The flowers at the jetty. Every October. 15 years. She stared at me. The whole town stared at me, because the whole town knows about the flowers. The faithful classmate, the mystery she has curated for a decade and a half. It's me, I said. It has always been me. I never met your son. But I have known him my whole career, because I have been in the water he died in, at night in October, and somebody should stand at the end of that jetty who knows exactly how hard he fought. And Eileen Kowalski, 71 years old, mother of the town, keeper of the story, put both hands over her face, and went down, not to the floor, into the front row chair somebody slid behind her, and the sound she made under her hands was the sound her son's name has been waiting on for 31 years. And nobody in that fire hall looked away, and nobody in that fire hall will ever tell the story right, and every single one of them will tell it forever. Grady and I did not talk at the fire hall. We talked where the promise was made, in his truck, in his mother's driveway, at 11 at night, with the engine off, 17 years later almost to the season. He had his hands on the wheel of a parked vehicle, the family posture, and for a long time the only sound was the cooling engine ticking down, and the two of us watching the dark harbor do nothing at the end of the street. He spoke first. She knew, he said. The whole time I was protecting her, she knew. He laughed. One note, the rusted hinge laugh I fell in love with, except nothing in it turned over this time. I made you into paperwork for 9 years she didn't need. And I sat with that, because it was true, and because it was not the whole truth. And being married to someone means you do not let them buy the comfortable version of their own guilt. It was 17, I said. 17 years, Grady. 9 of them she knew. All 17. You asked. He looked at me then, and his face came apart the way a careful man's face comes apart, in sections, and he said the only thing that was worth saying. I told myself it was for her. His hands came off the wheel. Somewhere in there it got easier for me too. Having a wife who does paperwork. I never had to lie awake when the duty phone rang. I just had to not ask. And there it was, parked in the same driveway where I once mistook it for love. Not asking. The whole family religion. I want to stop here, the way I stopped in that truck, because this is where I am supposed to sort everyone into their verdicts. And I have been trying for a year, and I am going to show you my work instead of my answer. 3 people kept 3 secrets in one small family. Grady hid me to protect his mother. Eileen hid what she knew to protect her wound. And I hid myself to protect them both, and called it kindness. And I have finally stopped using that word for it. Here is what I know now that I did not know in that truck 17 years ago. When somebody you love asks you to be smaller, the loving answer is not always yes. Sometimes the loving answer is, no, and I will stand here while you learn to bear the size of me. I did not give Eileen a gift by shrinking. I gave her 9 years of practice at looking away, and looking away is a muscle, and I helped her train it. My whole profession is refusing to leave people in the water. I left myself in it, a little at a time, 17 Octobers in a row, and I did it in the name of the gentlest people I know. And Eileen. I have turned her over more nights than I will admit. The easy sermon says her confession redeems her, and the hard sermon says 9 deliberate years cannot be paid off in 1 public minute, and I believe both sermons on different days of the week. What I keep instead of a verdict is one image. A woman finds a medal in a hall closet, and the medal says that the thing she prayed for in 1994 exists. It has a name. It eats at her table, and it did not come for her boy. Some people would have wept and put it back. She built a smaller daughter-in-law instead, one insult at a time, because a paperwork girl at her table asked her nothing, and an answered prayer asked her everything. I am not excusing it. I am telling you I finally understand the species of it. It was not jealousy. My mother-in-law was not jealous of me. She was drowning, in a fire hall, on dry land, for 31 years, and I was the swimmer she could see from the water, and she could not make herself raise her hand. Grady asked me, in the truck, if I could forgive him. I gave him the honest answer, which is that forgiveness is not a switch. It is a course you swim, and I had just gotten in the water. But I told him what I wanted, and it was not an apology. I want the mask burned, I said. All of it. You will stand next to me at every dinner in that town while people learn what your wife does. And when your mother's face gets hard to look at, you will look anyway. That is the whole price. He nodded, both hands back on the wheel of a truck going nowhere. And then he asked the question that turned us toward whatever comes after this story. He asked, will you take her to the jetty? And I looked out at the dark water at the end of the street, and October was almost over, and the flowers were already in the back seat. She was waiting on her porch the last Sunday of October, in her good wool coat, at 7 in the morning, which is the hour I have gone to the jetty for 15 years, and which I had told to no one. Grady must have told her. She came down the steps holding the rail, hip careful, and stopped at the truck window. And she did not say good morning, and she did not say I'm sorry. She said, show me where the flowers go. And I reached across and opened the door, because there are sentences that are apologies wearing work clothes. And after 31 years, I was not going to send this one back for the formal version. We walked the stone jetty in the wind with no talking in it. It is a 1/4 mile of granite out past the harbor light, and the footing is honest, meaning it will drop you if you dream. So we went slow, her hand on my forearm the whole way, which is a thing that had never happened in 17 years. Her hand, my arm, her weight trusted onto it. At the end there is a flat block where the stone breaks off into open water, and that is the place. I crouched and set the flowers down the way I always set them, stems to the land, blooms to the water, and I stood back up, and Eileen looked at the spot for a long time, and then she looked out at the horizon, which on that morning was a clean gray line with weather far behind it. And she asked me the question she had been carrying up the whole 1/4 mile. Is it cold, she said. In October. The water. Nobody had ever asked her question before. Everybody asks how deep, how far, how long. She asked the mother's question. Yes, I said. Because you do not soften facts for people who have waited 3 decades to be allowed to hold them. It is very cold. But I will tell you what the cold does. It slows everything down. The body gets quiet. The fighting gets quiet. It is not what you have been seeing at night, Eileen. At the end it is quiet. She stood with that. The wind moved her coat. And my mother-in-law nodded once. Out at the water. Not at me. The way you nod to someone across a distance. And whatever she set down on that jetty, she did not pick it back up, because she was lighter walking in. I felt it on my arm the whole 1/4 mile home. The scholarship dinner will happen again next October, the 33rd. And there is a new line item in the fund that the board approved in November without 1 vote against. The Cole Kowalski Fund will now sponsor 1 seat every year at a rescue swimmer candidate school, travel and gear and a stipend, for a young person from a working harbor town. Eileen proposed it herself, standing up at the board meeting with her notes shaking in her hand. And when the treasurer asked what to call the line item, she said, call it the answered prayer seat. And then she had to sit down. and nobody in that room pretended not to understand. The first recipient was announced 2 weeks ago. Sunburned nose. Both feet planted like a person standing on a deck. Piper starts candidate school in the spring, and she has already been warned, by me over a diner breakfast, that the school exists to make her quit and that she is not allowed to. She slid paper napkin across the table and asked me to write down the whistle pattern. 3 short. Wait. 3 short. She folded the napkin into her wallet, next to a soft gray square of newsprint, and I watched her do it and had to look out the window at the parking lot for a minute. At nothing. At a light pole. Until my coffee was drinkable again. Things are not repaired. I want to leave you with the truth and not the ribbon. Coal is still dead, and no line item touches that. My husband and I are doing the slow work, and some of it is good, and some Tuesdays the truck is very quiet. Eileen and I do not embrace. We are not those 2 women, and I do not think we will become them, and there is a kind of peace in retiring the hope. What we have instead is October. 2 women, 1 jetty, 7 in the morning, flowers riding in the back seat, and her hand on my forearm over the honest footing. Last time, walking back, she stopped at the harbor light and looked at my key ring, at the brass whistle with the paint gone, and she asked if she could hear it. Just once, just quietly. And I looked around at the empty morning, and I put it to my lips, and I gave the water 3 short blasts, and we stood together inside the sound while it carried out past the light, over the water, to whoever it is that sound goes to. Somebody is in here with you. That is all it says. It was enough for a girl in a storm. It was enough for an old woman on a jetty. Most days, it is enough for me. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. It took 17 years to learn that making yourself small for the people you love is not mercy. It is just a slower way of leaving them. And the bravest thing in some families is simply to be seen at full size. Have you ever shrunk yourself to keep the peace at somebody else's table? And is there someone in your family carrying a grief so old that it has started making decisions for them? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, early before the harbor wakes up. If this story held you, the like button tells me so, and subscribing means the next one finds you. New stories premiere every week. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people still out in deep water. I will see you in the next one.